Hi everyone. Geez, these lights are bright. I'm here today to talk to you about increasing the maximum effective balance, EIP-7251. It's less of a technical talk than the previous one, because I think there's a few things we probably need to go over. So to get started, we're going to talk about what the effective balance actually is. If we have a look at the beacon state, I'm hoping people know what the state is in the consensus layer. We've basically got two lists containing information about validators. There's the list of validator balances, which is the total list that a validator has, a total balance that a validator has. And then there's a list of validator objects. Each of those validators has an effective balance, and that effective balance is limited to a maximum, at the moment 32 ETH. There's also withdrawal credentials, and we'll go over that shortly. So the effective balance is used in a number of ways on the consensus layer. We basically use it for activation. At the moment, a validator needs to reach maximum effective balance of 32 ETH in order to become eligible to be activated on the network. We also need to potentially eject validators if they reach below 16 ETH. As well as all of that, rewards and penalties correlate with your effective balance, so it's fairly effective there, important there. And your probability to perform some actions, notably block production, which I know everyone likes if they're a validator, and being in a sync committee, your effective balance affects how likely you are to perform those duties. Last but not least, specifically around chain security, it's your voting weight for how the chain progresses. Next, we'll have a closer look at validators. So when we started with phase 0, there were two types of validators. A lot of people knew a lot about the BLS validators. They have a withdrawal address, which is what I mentioned before, starting with 0 byte and BLS credentials. There's also an execution layer validator which had execution credentials in its withdrawal address, and it was prefixed with a 1 byte. Both of those validators from phase 0 and up to now had a maximum effective balance of 32 ETH. In Capella, there were some changes made. Withdrawal sweeps was fairly popular. They were only actually available with the execution layer validators. So there was also a process made to swap from BLS credentials over to EL credentials. In Electra, the principal change that we're making is we're introducing a compounding validator. It's also going to have execution layer credentials, and they're going to be prefixed with a 02. So that's going to be our flag for where the effective balance can go to on a given validator. The effective balance is going to be able to increase to a maximum of 2,048 ETH, which is 64 times what it can today. So yeah, a compounding validator can have up to 2,048 ETH. That's pretty awesome. It has implications. So you're going to become more likely to propose a block because you have more effective balance if you're at 2,048 ETH, and also to participate in a sync committee. Your voting weight actually increases, so your vote on the security of the chain is increasing because of that as well. And the minimum activation balance is something that we added. So the problem that we had when we were going into this EIP is that we wanted to change the maximum effective balance, but we also wanted people to be able to activate at 32 ETH. So we can't just reuse the maximum effective balance like we had previously. So there's now a min activation balance which we use. It's going to be possible to consolidate validators. Any validator with execution credentials is going to be able to be potentially consolidated under a set of restrictions, obviously. The way it's going to work is it's going to be driven from an execution layer request. And that will give us the ability to prove authority of the credentials of the source validator, the validator that the balance is moving from. And then that balance is ultimately going to end up on a target validator. And the source validator will be shut down through that process. The advantage of the consolidation process over, say, exiting the validator and then manually doing your own deposit is that through the consolidation process, you only have to pay the duration of time in the exit queue, and you don't have to wait for the deposit to go through the activation queue. Why switch, I figure, is probably a pertinent question. For solo stakers particularly, it seems like a compounding validator might not be that useful, but there's probably a lot of people that are in a position where they've got, say, 32 ETH to stake. They might actually have 50 ETH to stake, right? And now you're going to be able to put that extra balance onto your validator and actually earn rewards on the 50 ETH, not just on the maximum effective balance of 32. Some people have expressed also that they don't particularly like the withdrawals process, the withdrawal sweep. So by going to a compounding validator, by going to a compounding validator, you're no longer going to have that withdrawal sweep. Well, not for a very, very long time. As an institutional, you might wish to reduce the number of validators that you're running, but maintain the same amount of stake. So this would allow you to do that and potentially reduce infrastructure costs somewhat. And generally available will be the ability, which I'll talk about in a minute, to withdraw your balance down to as low as 32 ETH. So we've added partial withdrawals for Electra. And it's pretty much only useful for compounding validators because you need to maintain that 32 ETH. So you can, if you're a compounding validator, you'll have an excess effective balance, but if you're not a compounding validator, you won't. It's also initiated via an execution layer request, which allows us again to prove the authority of the request. And one of the changes that we have made is that we're talking about changing the queues. So the balance that gets partially withdrawn will actually have to go through the exit queue because of some more changes. The nice thing about partial withdrawals is when we were originally talking about 7251, we had the concept of a custom ceiling where a validator could say, I want my maximum balance to be 128 ETH or 50 ETH or whatever. That's actually really complex. And this is already a bit of a beast. So we got rid of that for 7251. So partial withdrawals anyway will allow you to draw your balance down on your timeline without having to have a custom ceiling. So activation and exiting. Prior to Electra, it was very easy to put a number on the number of validators we want to activate or exit in any given epoch. I think the current number is around 8. So you could, because it was 8, you could know that like roughly a specific amount of ETH was coming on or leaving the chain as the chain security. At Electra, though, a validator is not just 32 ETH anymore. So you could have a validator that's activating that has 2,048 ETH. That really changes how we need to think about activation and exiting. So now we're looking at the balance change rather than the number of validators. And it's pretty simple maths, but the 8 validators per epoch translates pretty literally to 256 ETH. There's a few fields that have been added as well, such as the earliest exit epoch, which just allows us to do the maths and maintain it all in the background. Here's an example, very simple, of activation queue. So if we have a look at the top row and we imagine that that's validators coming online for 3 epochs. This example, where all of the validators have the same balance, works actually in Electra, or it works in Deneb and before. Literally 8 validators are coming online every single epoch, and that's super easy. The problem is when there's a large validator, like the second example. So in that example, the large validator is having to actually consume a number of epochs to have its balance processed. And then once it's complete, we can go back to putting on more validators. That obviously may be another compounding validator, and it may all start again. Slashing, my favorite topic. Slashing is a term that gets talked about a lot. And the problem I had when I was writing this talk was that overloading of the term. So just briefly, slashing in terms of the consensus layer is performing a malicious action on the network, and that action is a one-shot fail. Someone notices you've done something malicious, you're no longer participating on the network, you get booted. There's 2 portions to a slashing event. There's an initial penalty, and then there's also inactivities afterwards which go on for a period of time. In Electra, we are making some changes. We're not changing the inactivities, the second phase of the slashing event, but we are changing the initial penalty. So the problem that we have is that if you look at the Deneb rules and a large compounding validator of 2048 ETH, the initial penalty for that validator would be 64 ETH. That's a bit. And it's quite a bit of a barrier to entry for wanting to use this actual change. So we have changed the quotient, and the net result is in Electra, the initial penalty for a 2048 ETH validator, if they were to perform a slashable event, would be half an ETH. And they'd still pay the inactivity penalties, which scale up with balance anyway. So they will pay more balance, more inactivity than a 32 ETH validator, but the initial penalty is a bit more reasonable. This is a linear scale. So the good news is, for any non-compounding validators, their initial penalty becomes very, very small, 0.0078125 ETH. So that's a good outcome. To try and explain why one of the scenarios where slashing is kind of becomes a problem in terms of infrastructure, I've made a diagram, but I should read my notes because I was just missing something. So solo stakers, if you're staking at home, you're unlikely to have your keys in multiple locations. So because your keys are in one location, your risk to slashing remains 0 before and after compounding because your keys aren't in more than one location. This isn't a consistent statement for every single implementation. Some infrastructure providers rely on functionality of clients so that if a slashing event occurs in this first scenario, on average, there's only going to be 1 or 2 of those performing a duty in every slot. So if I can detect that quickly enough, I can shut down that node. And so maybe I get 1 or 2 of those validators slashed, and I can save a lot of my balance. But if I'm on that same shared kind of scenario, like the second example, and I have 1 validator key with the same balance, there's a lot larger penalty for getting slashed. So that's why the initial penalty was changed. Unfortunately, it doesn't change how quickly you can get your funds back. But that's a thing to consider if you're in infrastructure and in that position. The takeaway message probably, if you're doing consolidation, is just make sure you reassess your risk and don't leave yourself in a worse position than you are today if you are possibly going to get slashed. That's it from me. Are we on to questions? Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to start with questions now. Again, you can upvote, and the ones on the top will get answered first. So we're going to start with, do you expect a reduction in validator count when this is implemented, and if so, how big?
I'm hoping for a reduction. That was one of the bigger reasons that we wanted to do this. The validator list is already very large. A reduction in active validators, yes. By how much? I would see this being heavily used by larger staking pools. There's advantages like partial withdrawals that they could get from it. So I think that it will be pretty well embraced, but I'm hesitant to give a number to it.
All right, next question. It seems selecting attestation aggregator in the committee doesn't follow each effective balance. Is this fine?
It shouldn't be a problem because there's multiple aggregators in attestation committees every slot.
Thank you. How much of a reduction in the number of validators do you see after this EIP?
I'm going to decline to answer, sorry, and the same as the last one. I would hope that it's of the order of 10%, maybe more, but it's really hard to put a number on it because I'm not these operators.
How exactly is exiting an epoch ordering to be determined? Oh, sorry. Did you see that happen too?
I did see that happen. Do you still have the question?
I don't know. Hold on.
The exit order? I can answer
Yes.
the exit order. So the exit order is not any different to today in real terms. We've just expressed it differently. The people that have got to exit in earliest will be exiting first, and the duration that it takes will differ when there's compounding validators or partial exits or partial withdrawals because of the fact that that balance change is going through, but the ordering shouldn't change.
Thank you. What happens if large operators don't adopt 7251? Are there steps we can take to incentivize adoption?
We've taken a lot of steps to incentivize adoption. Initial slashing was a big step towards incentivizing it, and pushing all of this through execution layer requests actually reduces the UX for normal operators, but it was what the larger staking providers requested specifically for. So we have definitely been in active discussions to make sure that it's going to be used.
Is the probability of becoming a block proposer the same for both 2040 ETH validator and 6432 ETH validators?
It should be roughly equivalent.
Simple answer. How do we encourage more consolidation given that it's relatively risky?
It's only risky for large operators if they're distributing their keys amongst multiple nodes. So the easy answer to this is always put your keys in one location. Don't share them across nodes and you can't get slashed.
Oh, we had another one. Okay, there we go. Can you switch from compounding credential back to the 0x01 credential to re-enable auto sweep without exiting?
There's no current implementation that would support that, but there's some new functionality coming actually in the next talk that enables that to be written relatively easy should we need to in the future.
Wonderful. Isn't it supposed to be expensive to attack the network? Why reduce slash then?
We're only reducing the initial penalty, which hasn't been, I mean, overly effective in some ways anyway at reducing, like at discouraging people from performing slashing events. So the main thing is to not discourage people from using features that are helpful to the network.
I think we have time for one more. We'll see if we can get two in. But will EB still be computed only in 1 ETH increments?
Yes.
Okay, we're speed answering, going to get to some more. What is the average effective balance for validators at present?
The average effective balance, I believe, if I looked the other day, was about 33 ETH, but it might have been slightly more. I could be wrong on that.
Okay, last one. Roughly, a good one is not good enough. MEV, that's not a question. Is that a question? It's not. We're going to go for the one after that.
I don't know what that is. Sorry.
Yeah. Would the reduction of work to operate multiple validators with 7251 result in further increase on centralization of the stakes?
not further increase because it's the same pool that's operating them.
And that is all we have time for today. Please give a round for Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.